Hey guys, today we're going to talk about style. Hi guys, welcome back, and if you're new here, I'm Richard, I'm a web developer, and today we're going to learn about CSS. So if you're interested in making your website stylish, this is the video for you. This is a continuation of the HTML course, so if you haven't seen that, you can check it out in the card here, or I'll leave it in the description below. So we mentioned in the HTML videos that CSS is a way that we can style our websites, but also how we can position items on our websites. In that video, we also disabled some style sheets on some popular websites just to see how terrible they look without CSS. Now, CSS is a more stylistic part of building websites. So I actually know quite a few developers, like the smartest guys you've ever met, who really struggle with CSS. And I think that's because it's a more artistic approach. However, that being said, if you want to put the time in to learn this stuff and learn this stuff properly, then anyone can get great at CSS in a really quick time. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and the cascade part is the real interesting bit. Because what that means is if we style our font red, then directly below it we style that font blue, the cascade, the fall of this, will determine that that font is going to be blue because that's the second in line. So the requirements for this course, guys, you need yourself an IDE and you need yourself a browser. And hopefully you've watched my course on HTML or you have a little bit of HTML knowledge. That is going to come in very useful going forward from here. So if you're ready, grab yourself that cup of tea and we're going to get right into it. Okay guys, so let's start by adding a folder to house our project. I'm just going to do mine on the desktop here and call it CSS Basics. And if we just drag this over our IDE, it should just open up for us. Right, and we can just close this welcome screen. Then now what we want to do is add our index.html file. So if you just right click, click new file, index.html. And we're going to use Emmet today, which comes built in with VS Code and I think a few other IDEs. If you don't have it, your IDE probably has an extensions section where you can add plugins and stuff like that. So if you have Emmet installed, all you need to do is hit exclamation mark. You can see it says Emmet abbreviation, then hit tab. And that gives you all the sort of default setup for HTML project. So we just need to change our title. And I'm also using Live Server today, which is another extension, which means we just don't have to reload our browser constantly. It does it for us. So again, it's in the extensions. If you type in Live Server, you can see that one there, Ritwick Day, install that one, and we should be good to go. You can see I have this go live now, so if I hit that, we are live. So we've got nothing on the page at the moment. So let's add a H1, just so we can see something. And we're going to just say, hello world. Hello world. Okay, there we go. Let's pull this in a little bit like that. Great. So, there's three ways we can style CSS. The first is inline with style tags. The second one is in the head. And the third one is the one we're going to use today, which is an external style sheet, which is the correct way of doing it. The other two just add too much mess in your HTML document, and you should keep your HTML document for HTML. We'll show you briefly the other two. So if we go to our H1, we can write style equals quote marks, and we can say color red. And there you go, it's changed red. So the other way to do it is using some of the things we do in the external style sheet, which is give our H1, well, we can give our H1 a name, or we can actually just style the H1 directly. So if we go underneath our title, inside our closing head brackets, and create a style tag, and you can see it's created the closing style tag for us as well, we can write H1, curly brackets, color blue will go because we're still red. If I save that, my browser auto refreshes and we get blue. So there we go. This is much cleaner because imagine if we had lots of H1 tags down here, we'd have to go down to all of them and add that red color if we want them all to be red. But still, this is not the best way. So the best way is linking an external style sheet into your HTML and having a document just for styles, which we'll do now. So we're just going to delete this style and we're going to make use of Emmet again. So if you just type in link, you can see this drop down menu with lots of options to do things. There's a CSS in there. And actually CSS is the default. So if I hit tab, you can see there's a rel style sheet and asks me for a href. It asks me for a location for my style sheet, which we haven't created yet. So let's create that now. Just going to go back to our Explorer tab. I'm going to create a new folder first, CSS. Then within my CSS folder, I'm going to create a new file called style.css, which is a very common name. And now what we can do is we can link to that style sheet. So the way we do that is we'll give it the path to the file. So at the moment it's inside the CSS folder. You can see it's helping me here. / and there you go, style.css. Save that. And all we have to do now is put that H1 in again with a color of red. And you can see it's gone red. So we know now that this file is linked. I'm just going to increase my font size for you guys. There we go. I'm going to close this window. That's better. Right, perfect. So there's different ways we can target an element on our page. In this case, we've been doing H1 to add styles to it. And there's a few different reasons why we'd use each one. So, as you can see, we've used a H1 here, followed by curly brackets, then color, colon, red, semicolon. Now that will affect, if I go back to our index.html and do another H1, hello, yeah, let's do hello world. That will affect both of our H1s. Sometimes that can be a good idea. Maybe you want uniform across all your tags. Maybe you want some things to be specific to that element. So another way we can do it is by adding a class. And all our classes is a name we add to our element that can then be styled in our style.css. So it's a reference name, I guess you could call it. And the way we do that is, if we go into, just delete that bottom hello world, we're going to go into our H1 inside our triangle brackets and do class equals heading. Okay. Then if we just jump back into our style, and instead of H1, we're going to say class heading. And the way you reference it in CSS is you say dot or full stop, period, heading. And we're just going to change this to blue, just so you can see the change. There you go. So you're saying a class of heading, the color is blue. Now, if we were to add another H1 that didn't have that class, it wouldn't have that color. So another way we can do this is we can add it on an ID. So instead of a class of a heading, we could say an ID of a heading. And the way we do style and IDs is instead of a full stop, we do a hash. Then we save that, and you can see we get the same result. And now there's reasons you do stuff on classes instead of IDs. IDs, you can only have one ID on a page. Classes, you can have multiple. So you can add the class of heading to lots of different items and they can all style the same. There's also specificity reasons, which we'll get on to later in the course. Okay guys, so I just want to talk a little bit about colors in CSS. So we have our named colors in CSS. So things like red, blue, green. We also have some more HTML5 colors like coral, some other interesting names that we have for shades of our colors. We also have the hex value, which can be 6 or 3 numbers or letters, depending on how you want to write it. And it starts with a hash. So for font, you would say color, colon, hash. Then the sixth variant, you could say FF0000. That would give you a red color because the first two digits, the first two spaces are for red. Then the next two are green, then the next two are blue. We go from 0 to 9, then from A to F. So F being the most color, 0 being the least. So obviously if you mix these, so maybe you want to do FF3399, you would get a variant of those mixed colors. Another way we can do colors is we can do with RGB. And RGB is exactly that, red, green, blue. So similar to hex, where you're mixing red, green, and blue colors, in RGB you're doing it with a number from 0 to 255, with the space being a comma. So for instance, you could go 255, 0, 0 for full red color, or 255, 122, 122 for a shade of a color mixing red, green, and blue. So I'm just going to change this back to a class. It's much more usable. Okay, so this next part we're going to talk about margin and padding. So I'm going to add just a little box to the page, a div, so we can explain it a little bit easier. So I'm just going to call a div with a class equal to box. Okay. And we're just going to add a little bit of content in here. We're going to just add a H2. We'll say CSS is awesome. And we're going to add a little paragraph. And actually using Emmet, we can do things a lot quicker. So if we actually just type P and tab, you can see it does our opening and closing brackets. So we'll start using this a little bit more. Also, we can have some default text with Emmet as well. So if we type lorem, and say we want to have 30 characters of text, we say lorem 30, then hit tab. And you see we've got all this text now. I'm just going to hit a view toggle word wrap just so it wraps down for us. There we go. As you can see, we have all this stuff here now. Right, so let's style this box. Let's jump into our style.css. New dot box, curly brackets. Now let's add a background color so we can see it. So background color, colon, and we're going to just do a EE, which is a very light gray. There we go. Cool. So let's talk about margin and padding. So if we add padding to this box, 20 pixels, you can see it's added some at the top and at the sides, bottom, left and right, inside the box, right? If I did a margin, let's do a margin of 10 pixel. This is doing outside the box, so this is increased. So if I do this to 20, you can see the white space has increased. So margin is outside the box, padding is inside the box, okay? And we've done it all on one selector. We've just done it on the padding or the margin selector. But what we can do is we can break this out. So we can say 20 pixels on the top, 4 pixels on the right, so we go clockwise. We can say 30 pixels on the bottom and 10 pixels on the left. So each one of these paddings, we can give something different. So let's make that a bit more obvious. So 20 top, 4 pixels on the right. Let's make it 40 pixels on the right. You can see it's pulled in. We can say 100 pixels on the bottom. So there you go. So it goes around like that. We can also do it individually like this. Padding hyphen left, 30 pixels. Then we can do padding right. Oops, padding hyphen right, 100 pixels. And you can chain them like that. Similarly, you can do exactly the same with margin. So you can do 10 at the top, right, left, blah, blah. You can also do partial ones. So you can say you want 10 pixels at the top and bottom, and 50 pixels left and right. So if it's only 2, you can do like this. And you can also say you want 10 pixels at the top, 50 pixels on the right, 20 pixels on the bottom, and if you miss off the 4th one, that says 10 at the top, 50 on the right and left, and 20 pixels at the bottom, because you haven't given it a right, so you haven't given it a left attribute, so it just copies the attribute from the right. Now if we inspect this, you can see right here what we have. So the actual box itself is 349 pixels wide. We have 30 on the left, 100 on the right for padding. We haven't put a border on yet. And we have 10, 50, 20 for the margins. So this is a good way to see what all your paddings and margins are doing in your dev tools, which should be just right click and inspect element. Inspect. And with this, going over your margins and paddings, browsers have some default things set in them. So if I just look up here, let's click inspect on this hello world, you can see at the side of this, there's some white space, right? Go to the body, and you can see the body has 8 pixels of margin around it. This is default, we haven't done this. And a few elements do. So H1 has by default some margin. So what we can do is we can just reset all of these things to 0. So let's go to the top of a document, create some space, do a star symbol, curly brackets, and we can say margin 0. There you go. So now that's reset. Our font has gone all the way to the top corner and there's no spacing. Okay, so let's finish up this box by adding some borders and fixing some of this padding stuff. So let's go back to just a padding of 20 pixels and a margin of, let's say, 15 pixels. Cool. So now we can add borders, and borders are similar to padding and margin in the way that they are set up. So you can have one attribute, one selector attribute setting, or you can split them up into its parts, because we have a border width, a border color, border radius, border style. So these are some things that you can add as individual ones. So let's have a look at that. So we can say border color, and we can do a border color of, let's just do a border color of 999999. Okay. And as you can see, it hasn't done anything. And the reason it hasn't done anything is because it doesn't know how wide it's going to be, and it doesn't know the style. So let's do that. So I'll do a border width. Let's do a 2 pixel border width. And we need to tell it what style it's going to be. Border style. So as you can see now, there's a few different ones here. So you can have dotted. You see that there. You can have dashed. Or you can just have solid. They're the main ones. You can have a little play around. So there you go, we've got this border. Or like I said earlier, we can do a border all in one. So to do this all in one, let's just cut most of this out. Say border, colon, 2 pixels, solid, hash, 999999. Okay. Great. So we've done all that in a smaller space now. We can also add a border radius to this. And if I show you this, you'll be able to see what it is. Do that by 6 pixels. And that just rounds these corners here, right? Just makes it a little bit smoother. And you can go crazy with that if you want. Got 40 pixels. Feel free to have a little play around with that. Okay, so that's looking a lot better, our little box. What we're going to do now is, this title's a little bit out, so let's wrap this whole thing in a container so we can add some margins to it, so it's just not stuck right to the ends. Let's jump into our HTML. So the first thing after the body opening tag, we're going to do another emit command, which is .container, and hit tab. And there you go, it's added a div with a class of container. And also, if you want to do an ID of container, you could do hash container tab, and that would do it as an ID. We just want to copy this closing bracket, put it right just before the body closes itself there. Perfect. Let's just tab this in, select all this, and just hit tab. There we go. Just going to get rid of these lines. Now we've got a container wrapping our whole project. So let's jump into the style. Let's jump just right under our star here and do dot container, curly brackets, margin 15 pixels. Perfect. Just pulled it away a little bit. Great. And now what we can do is we can just remove the left and right margin from here, just so it's a bit more in line. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at all the font properties and all the font CSS we can use to style things. So we're going to have a look at styling this heading a little bit better. So the first thing we can do is we're going to give it a proper color. So as we've been doing here with the hex values, we can give our heading a proper hex value. So let's give it a hex value of hash 113355. There you go, it's like a nice subtle grey. We're also going to change what font family it is. By default, Chrome is giving us the font family of Times New Roman. So what we want to do is change that. We'll change that to Helvetica. So if you say font-family, Helvetica, and you can see some things have come up and asking me if I want to use these, but we're going to say Helvetica, Arial, sans -serif, right? And what this is saying is this is the font family. So we're going to use Helvetica if we have it, Arial if not, then if we don't have Arial even, we'll go sans serif. These are web safe fonts, so all browsers have these, or they should have them. You should have them on your machine. So it's just basically just saying if you don't have it, use Arial, and you can switch these around. So now if I save that, it's a much nicer, more modern font, I think. So let's have a little play with the font size. Let's say font-size. Let's go 40 pixels because we're the main heading. Perfect. And we can also adjust the font weight. So font weight is how bold it is. So font weight, so we can go down to 100. And it won't have all these settings, but it goes from 100 to 900 in 100 increments. So if I go to 200, it probably won't have a change. No, it doesn't. 300? Doesn't. 400 probably does. Yep. 500? No. 600? Yes. I think that's the default. Then we'll go all the way up to 900 basically, which doesn't change. So 600 is the start of the bold. So we're going to use 400. We want it a little bit narrower. And we can also give it a text decoration. So if we jump down here, we can use this list here, text decoration. And you can see there's a few things here. Line through, so if we save that. Or we can have underline, which is what we're going to use. So there's lots of other things you can play around with. You can also set this to none. So say if you've got a link that has an underline, you can say text decoration none, and it will get rid of that underline. A lot of properties have a none value, or if it's a number value, you can just type 0. And the last thing we're going to do on this heading is we're going to use text transformation. Text transformation. Text transform. There we go. And you can see from here we can have a lowercase, so it'll convert everything to a lowercase. We can do uppercase, converts everything to uppercase. I think we'll say with uppercase on this one. Right, so let's have a little look within here. We have this title and this paragraph tag. So let's have a look at styling some of these. Let's jump to our index and remind ourselves. So we have a H2 and a paragraph tag. So let's style the H2 on the tag H2, because I think we'll have lots of these boxes and we always want the H2 to be the same. So let's go to style. Let's drop down below our box and say H2 Gives us a little bit of space. So H2. And let's say we want our H2 in the middle. So we can use something called text align. And you can see here we have right, left. So if we do right, you'll see it move across to right. Left is the default, and center. So we want to use center. And why don't we give it the same font as our heading? So I'm just going to grab this font family and paste it right in the heading here. It's the H2. That's much better. So let's make our H2 italic. So the way you do that, you go font style, italic. And there's a few other ones that you can use in there, but italic is probably one of the most useful ones. Okay, so we've just got a bit of a lean on it now. Let's think about this paragraph tag next. So we'll style this also on this paragraph tag because this will affect all paragraphs that we're going to use. And similar like we did earlier, we did font family, we did the font size, and we did the font weight. So CSS has its own property that lets you do them all in one. And it's just font. And the first one is the font weight. So we just want a normal weight. Or you can do it with the numbers, 100, 200, etc. Let's say normal. We're going to go for 16 pixels, which is the browser default, so this won't change. And we're going to say Arial. Do we save that? You see now if I change this to 26, it grows. So back to 16. And we probably just want a little bit of padding above this paragraph tag, right? So let's just add a little padding to the top and the bottom of 10 pixels. Left and right, we don't really care about at the moment. Okay, perfect. I just want to show you one more property we can use, which is letter spacing. So if we jump to the H2, letter hyphen spacing, and this is exactly what you think it will be. It spaces out the letters. So we can go crazy and go something big like 10 pixels, or we can go something a little bit more subtle like 2 pixels. So you can adjust the kerning on those fonts. Something that I don't use very often, but it's nice to know there's options like that in CSS that you can use. Okay, so up next we're going to talk about lists and the things we can do with lists. So let's go back to our HTML file. And we're going to go within our container, underneath our first box, and we're going to say .box to add another box div with a class of box. So .box will make it a class. There we go. Nice and quick. And we're going to give it a title. So if we just do a H3 tab, I think you're getting the hang of this. And we can say something like most visited websites. I'll save that. There we go. So the first list we're going to talk about is the unordered list. We did a little bit of this in the HTML course. So if we do a UL, and inside the UL we need some li tags. And we're going to make these anchor tags. We're going to make these links. So we're going to do triangle bracket a href equals. So I'm just going to give our link and triangle bracket. And the link we're going to go to, I'm going to say https://google.com. Pretty sure Google's going to be up there. So we're just going to say Google in here. Goggle. Let's just copy this. So let's copy the whole li tag. Once, twice. Let's replace Google with, I guess, YouTube. YouTube is going to be one. And let's say Facebook. Okay, perfect. So now we have our list here. And as you can see, it's moved along to the right a little bit. If I just jump in a little bit here, it's moved into the right a little bit and it has the bullet points. So let's have a look at changing the bullet points. So there's things we can do here. So let's jump into the style. And underneath our P, we can say li list. You can see it's coming up. List style, list hyphen style, square. Save that, and you can see they've gone square. There's also a few more that you can have a little play around with. To be honest, these don't change that much. I probably stick with circle most of the time if we do use them. A lot of times you override them with something like an image. Okay, so we can also say list style none, and it removes them. We can also say display. Say we don't want these underneath each other, we want them across. We can say display inline block. If you remember from the HTML, that means we want them to be in line with each other, but block elements so you can have padding the margin on them. Inline elements will go across, but won't have the controllability of having padding. And you can see how we're still over to the right. So what we can do is, if we right click on here, inspect, you can see the reason for that is this UL element has padding 40 pixels. So we can just remove that with the UL. So we'll just go above here, UL, and we can say padding 0. That removes all the padding, so it's nicely in line. Now another type of list is an ordered list. Now an ordered list is one that can have numbers associated with it, so it can count for you. So let's jump back into our HTML, and instead of a UL here, we're just going to change the U to an O. And make sure it's changed at the closing bracket, and save that. You can see it's moved across because, if we go jump back to our style, our UL had padding. So now we're not using the UL, we're using the OL. Doesn't matter. So if I just empty out the contents of our list item and press save, you can see that now we have numbers attached to it. I'm going to actually say I want 10 pixels of padding all around on this one. On the OL, let's say 10 pixels, then 20 pixels left and right, then bring it in a little bit. Perfect. Then I'm going to just remove the LI because I think we'll keep it like this. Next thing we want to do, I'm not a big fan of this blue color, so let's change the color of the links. If you notice in our index, we haven't added classes. So what we can actually do in our style, we can say the list item with an anchor tag inside. We want to change that color. So we're not wanting to change all anchor tags on the page, just the anchor tags that are within a list item. And that's how you do it, li space a. We'll talk about more of these ways to be more specific later. So let's say color hash 113355. There we go. We can put a semicolon at the end. We don't need to. You need to if you're going to follow it with another property value. So if it's the last line of CSS within your curly brackets, you don't need to, but it's good practice. So now we have this nice kind of little bluey color. It's a lot better. Okay, so we're going to create a form now. So in our index.html, let's jump down below the box, and we are going to create another box. So dot box, because we want it to have this nice little surrounded grey around it. Now let's add a H2 and hit tab. This is just going to be a contact us form. Okay, so there you go. It's taking the styling from the original H2. Let's jump underneath, and if we say form tab, it's the Emmet abbreviation will do a few things. So action wants to know when we post this form, when we click send, where is it going to send to? We don't have the functionality to deal with forms. This is just a dumb website. So we're going to say slash, just so it thinks it's just going to go to the home page. Okay. We can also say method in our form equals post. And that will actually make sure it's a post and not asking for data from our server. Okay. And let's give it a class. Let's give this form a class equals contact-form. Okay. So now we need to start populating it. So we need three things. We need a name, we need a message, and we need a submit button. So let's create a label. And if we use Emmet, so type in label, tab, label for, So it's going to be for the name, and we're just going to give the label a name. So it's going to say name. Okay. So now the next thing is going to be our input. Similarly, we can say input and hit tab. Type text. Yes, we want it to be a text field. And we want it to give it an ID just so when we click on that label, it shares the same for an ID. So it will select our input when we click on the text. Okay, so save that. Looking good. Now let's create another label. So label tab for message. And let's fill in our label with message colon. And underneath, we're just going to go for a text area. So if we say text area tab, we can give it a name of message. Our ID needs to match the label. So for message. And the rows and columns are fine. Let's save that. So looking a little funky, but this is just a standard HTML, remember, and that's why we need the CSS. So finally, let's add a button with a type equal to submit. So then the form knows that actually when this button is hit, this is the submit button. And we can say send in here, like that. Okay. Give that a save. And now we're going to jump into the CSS and make this look a little bit better. So the first thing we want to do is, I think we'll just keep the form in half of this container. So let's do that. Let's do dot contact -form width 50%. So we're saying we want the form to take up 50% of the available space, so in its parent, the parent being this box, right? So next thing we want to do, let's make sure the label is on its own line. So the way we can do that is we can say label, curly brackets, display block, because block doesn't allow things to be on the same line as it. It's not an inline element or an inline block element. So saving that will force the next item down. Let's change the font of label. So we're just going to use the shorthand font. We want it to be 400 width, 400 weight. We want it to be 20 pixels and Arial font. Then we just want to add a little bit of padding above it because the input field of name is nearly touching message, for example, the label of message. So let's do padding -top 10 pixels just to give it a bit more breathing space. Perfect. So we can see now the name input is nowhere near as wide as the text area input. And that's because the text area has the columns and columns and rows attribute on it. Inputs don't have that. So we can just force this. So if we just jump down underneath label, we can say the input, curly brackets, we want the input to be width 100% of the available space. Now that is inside the form, which is only 50% of the container itself. And as you can see, it's still not quite as large as the text area. So what we could do is we could add text area to this. So we're basically chaining tags. So input, comma, space, text area. And as you can see, now they're both in line. And that's because you're now saying this will affect two selectors. So input and text area. Okay, so let's have a little play with the border on this, shall we? So let's say border, 2 pixel, solid, and we're going to give it this nice color, which is 1BB938. That's a nice green color because it grabs your attention, right? So I want this input, this name input, to be a bit taller. So what I can do is, even though I've done an input here, I can also just have another input here, and it will just add to the input. So I'm going to say height 30 pixels. That's a lot nicer. Okay, so our button is looking a little sad. So let's jump down here, And let's just do button. And you can see I'm styling a lot on the tags here. This is only a one-page thing, so you might want to style a lot more on classes if you're going to reuse a lot of this stuff as well, or you might just want a different color button. So bear that in mind what you want to do when styling. So let's make the height of this button 40 pixels. There we go. Just to match the input. Let's make the width of it 100 pixels. And this is just numbers I'm making up. This is probably not the most stylish thing at the moment. We'll do that in a video later where we take what we've learned here and make a better looking website than this. Let's do a font size. Oh, font size of 20 pixels. Semicolon instead of colon there. Give that save. That's looking better. We want to just move it away from the message box a little bit, so let's do that with margin top. Because if we use padding, it will pad out inside the button. So margin top, 14 pixels. There we go, a little bit of space. Now we want to do the same green color that we did the border in. So I'm just going to copy the green from up here. And we're going to say background color. In fact, let's use background. So background is like shorthand as well. But if you just give it one thing, you can give it color. So you don't need to do background color all the time. So hash, paste in that code. So now we're just using background instead of background color, just a little bit shorter. We want the text color, so just say color to be white. That border doesn't look great here, so let's just say border none. So you can remove border just with one command. And let's round it a little bit. So let's say border dash radius 40 pixels. Okay, so we've got a nice round green button now. Okay, so there's lots of things you can do with forms. You can go very deep into them, but obviously this is just the basics. So stay tuned for videos later to see what we can do with forms. Okay guys, so we also have comments in CSS similar to what we have in HTML, and they're far more useful in CSS because you might have pages and pages of CSS code. So having a way to write comments and remind yourself of what this actually is on the page is really useful. So the way we do comments in CSS is we start with a /, then the star. Then we can write whatever we want. So if we do space, write our comment. Then to close it off, we just do */. So we just do it in reverse to close it. And we can put our comments onto their own lines as well. They don't need to be on the same line. Just as long as we start with a /, a star, and end with a */. The comment won't be processed as a style, and it's just there so we can look at the comments and figure out what we're doing in our CSS. Okay guys, so congratulations for making it to the end of part 1 of this CSS course. In part 2, we're going to look at a bit more layout and a bit more about the units we can use in CSS. And in part 3, we're actually going to design a website using what we've learned. So well done for making it this far. The links for the other videos when they're live are in the description. And if you'd like to subscribe, like, comment, well, I'm not going to stop you. That really helps me out. But thanks for making it this far, guys. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video.